There is a door in front of you. Behind it, people are talking in low, confident voices. Chairs move. Someone laughs softly. A projector hums somewhere in the room. On the table outside, there is a name tag with your name on it. You were invited. Your work was checked. Your application was accepted. Your email was answered. Somebody somewhere looked at what you could do and decided you belonged here. But your hand is still on the handle, and just before you open the door, a small thought appears. Maybe they made a mistake. Not a dramatic thought, not a full panic. Just a quiet sentence, almost polite, as if your mind is trying to save you from humiliation before it happens. Maybe they meant someone else. Maybe they only saw the good parts. Maybe you have been lucky for longer than luck was supposed to last. So you walk in with a calm face, you shake hands, you sit down, you nod at the right moments. From the outside, you look prepared, but inside, something is counting every word you say, every pause, every glance from someone across the table, every moment where you do not know something immediately. The room is not a room anymore. It is an examination. And the strange thing is that success does not make it disappear. Sometimes success makes it worse. Every achievement becomes less like proof and more like debt. Every promotion feels like a higher platform from which you can fall. Every compliment becomes a new witness who will eventually realize they were wrong about you. This is the paradox. The more competent you become, the more evidence you collect. But somehow, the evidence does not enter. It stays outside you, like rain sliding down glass. People call this impostor syndrome, but the name can make it sound smaller than it is, like a workplace insecurity, like a confidence problem, like something that can be solved by repeating kind sentences in the mirror. The deeper problem is more unsettling. Sometimes the feeling of being a fraud does not come from having no ability. It comes from having enough ability to see how much more there is. The beginner often stands at the edge of a field and sees a simple path. The expert steps farther in and sees the swamp, the weather, the hidden holes, the old maps that were wrong, and the bodies of everyone who walked too confidently before them. Competence does not always feel like certainty. Sometimes competence feels like losing the innocence that made certainty possible. In 1978, psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes described something they called the impostor phenomenon. They were studying high-achieving women who had objective signs of success, degrees, positions, recognition, praise, and proof from the outside world. But inside, many of these women did not feel successful. They felt like they had fooled people. They believed their accomplishments came from luck, timing, charm, extra effort, or others overestimating them. When they succeeded, the success did not become part of their identity. It was explained away. It was treated like an accident that had not yet been corrected. This is one of the strangest features of the impostor phenomenon. It does not lack evidence. It rejects digestion. The evidence arrives. It is seen. It may even be understood, but it cannot become nourishment. It cannot be absorbed into the self. A person can have the award on the shelf, the title in the email signature, the degree on the wall, and still feel that somewhere there is a hidden court where the real verdict has not yet been announced. This is why reassurance often fails. Someone says, "But you are clearly good at this," and the mind answers, "You do not see what I see." Someone says, "You earn this. And the mind answers, you do not know how close I was to failing. Someone says, everyone respects you. And the mind answers, that is because I have managed the performance well. The compliment enters the room and is immediately cross-examined. Was it just politeness? Did they really mean it? Would they say that if they knew how long it took me? Would they say that if they saw the drafts, the doubts, the panic, the blank screen, the moments where I had no idea what I was doing? The imposter mind does not simply refuse praise. It puts praise on trial, and it is a ruthless judge. Clance later developed a scale to measure this experience. It asked about fear of being exposed, discomfort with praise, attributing success to luck, feeling that achievements are not truly deserved, and the sense that one must work excessively hard just to keep the illusion alive. The scale gave structure to something many people felt, but could not explain. But a scale can only measure the outline. It cannot fully capture the private theater of it. The email arrives. Congratulations. The person reads it once, then again, then a third time. For a moment, there is relief. Then the mind begins its work. Maybe they sent this to everyone. Maybe the standards were lower this year. Maybe the project looked better than it was. Maybe I only succeeded because no one noticed the weak parts. Then, at the bottom, there is one neutral sentence. Not even criticism. Just a small suggestion. A line about what could be improved next time. That is the sentence the mind keeps. Not the praise. Not the acceptance. The weak part. The possible crack. The one detail that proves the entire structure might be unstable. This is not random insecurity. It has a logic. A painful one. If you believe you are an imposter, then success becomes dangerous. Success increases attention. Attention increases the chance of exposure. The better things go, the more people look at you, and the more impossible it becomes to hide. So achievement does not calm the fear. It feeds it. A student gets into a prestigious program and thinks, now the real students will see me. A worker is promoted and thinks, now the serious people will expect serious things. An artist gains an audience and thinks, now there are more witnesses to the moment I run out. From the outside, these look like victories. From the inside, they feel like being moved closer to the edge of the stage. This is why the imposter phenomenon can feel almost supernatural. The very thing that should disprove it becomes part of its evidence. If you fail, you were exposed. If you succeed, you fooled them again. The mind has built a trap where every outcome returns to the same conclusion. I do not really belong here. But before we call that irrational, we need to understand why it can feel so convincing. Because in one sense, the imposter mind is noticing something real. Competence is not a solid object. It is not a stone you carry in your pocket. It is unstable, contextual, dependent on energy, environment, tools, memory, health, luck, timing, and the invisible help of other people. You can be competent and still not know what to do tomorrow. You can be skilled and still make a stupid mistake. You can be respected and still have a day where your mind feels empty. You can deserve your place and still not feel certain inside it. The imposter mind takes this instability and turns it into accusation. It says, because your competence is not absolute, it is fake. Because you still struggle, you are lying. Because you still need effort, you are not natural. Because you still feel fear, you do not belong. But this is where the paradox begins. The deeper you go into a field, the more visible its complexity becomes. A beginner learns a few tools and feels powerful. A beginner can say, "This is simple," because the beginner does not yet know what simplicity is hiding. They have not seen the exceptions. They have not seen the edge cases. They have not failed in enough subtle ways. They have not developed the painful sensitivity that allows a more advanced person to notice what could go wrong. In 1999, Justin Kruger and David Dunning published a study with a title that became famous, "Unskilled and Unaware of It." Their research suggested that people with low ability in a domain often lack the metacognitive skill to recognize their own poor performance. In simple terms, the skill needed to do something well is often related to the skill needed to judge whether you did it well. This creates a strange early confidence. The person who knows little may not see the mountain. They see a hill. They climb a few steps and announce the landscape conquered. But the person who keeps climbing sees more. The horizon widens. The first hill becomes one ridge among many. Behind it are other ridges. Behind those, weather, distance, rock, ice. The quiet knowledge that reaching one point only reveals the size of what remains. This is the cruel education of competence. It does not only teach you what to do, it teaches you how much can go wrong. It teaches you to see the difference between acceptable and excellent, between clean and merely finished, between lucky and repeatable, between knowing the answer and understanding why the answer works. So the competent person is often less comfortable than the beginner, not because they know less, because they can see more. A medical student may begin with admiration for the body as a system. Later, after years of training, the body becomes stranger, more fragile, more full of exceptions. A programmer starts by making something work. Later, they see security, scale, dependencies, failure states, hidden assumptions. A writer begins by loving sentences. Later, every sentence carries rhythm, implication, cliché, silence, audience, and the terrible possibility of being almost good. Competence multiplies perception, and perception is not always comforting. This is why the phrase, "just be confident," can feel so empty. Confidence is easy when the picture is small. It is harder when you can see the frame, the wiring, the cracks in the wall, and the darkness just beyond the light. The person who feels like an impostor may not be blind to their ability. They may be painfully aware of its limits, and awareness of limits can look, from the inside, like fraudulence. This becomes sharper when we bring in E. Torrey Higgins and self-discrepancy theory. Higgins argued that emotional discomfort often comes from gaps between different versions of the self. There is the actual self, the person you believe you are. There is the ideal self, the person you wish you were. And there is the ought self, the person you believe you should be. The imposter often lives under the pressure of all three. The actual self is tired, inconsistent, still learning, still afraid, still occasionally lost. The ideal self is calm, brilliant, effortless, original, respected, never confused, never ordinary. The ought self whispers that you should already be better by now. This creates a private distance no achievement can easily close, because the comparison is not fair. You are not comparing yourself to another human being. You're comparing yourself to a ghost, a version of you with no body, no fatigue, no childhood, no nervous system, No bad mornings, no blank hours, no need to revise, no need to ask for help. And because the ghost never actually has to work, it never fails. It stands above you, clean and impossible. Then the real self does what real selves do. It hesitates. It learns slowly. It forgets something obvious. It takes longer than expected. It needs feedback. It does not always know the right answer in the moment. And the imposter mind says, "See, this is the proof." Not proof that you are human, proof that you are fake. There is a particular sadness in that mistake, because the person is not failing to reach competence. They are failing to match a fantasy of competence that no living mind could sustain. Real competence is messy. It has drafts, it has deleted paragraphs, it has questions that sound foolish until they save the project. It has repetition, boredom, delay, and the private embarrassment of not knowing things others seem to know already. Real competence often feels less like brilliance and more like returning to the work after the fantasy has died. But many people do not recognize this. They think competence should feel clean. They imagine that one day, if they become truly good, the doubt will vanish. The room will open. The title will fit. The voice inside will finally say, "Yes, now we are safe." Sometimes that day never comes, not because they are inadequate, because the mind keeps moving the standard. Before the achievement, it says, "If I get this, I will believe." After the achievement, it says, "Yes, but not like this. You got lucky. You had help. The timing was favorable. The others were busy." The real test is next time. The future becomes the place where exposure is always waiting. This is how a person can build an impressive life and still feel internally temporary. They do not inhabit success. They visit it. Every room has a checkout time. Perfectionism makes this even worse. If your standard is not excellence but flawlessness, then reality will always convict you. Every project has a seam. Every performance has a missed note. Every conversation has a moment you could have handled better. Every decision has an alternate version where you were wiser, faster, kinder, more precise. A perfectionistic mind does not see a flaw as part of the work. It sees the flaw as a revelation. One mistake does not mean something went wrong. It means the truth has slipped out. This is why some people cannot enjoy success for more than a few seconds. Enjoyment requires permission to let the work be finished. Perfectionism refuses that permission. It keeps searching the floor after the guests have gone, looking for the stain that proves the celebration was premature. There is always a stain. That is the rule of being real. But to the imposter, the stain is not just imperfection. It is evidence of deception. A person gives a presentation. People clap. Someone says it was excellent. The person smiles. But later in bed, the mind returns to slide 7. A small stumble. A phrase repeated twice. One face in the audience that looked bored. The applause fades. The stumble remains. It grows in the dark until it becomes the whole event. By morning, the memory has been edited, not consciously, not maliciously, but carefully enough that success now contains a hidden accusation. This is one of the reasons imposter feelings are so resistant to achievement. Achievement is broad, fear is specific. Achievement says the whole thing worked. Fear says yes, but here is the exact moment it almost did not. And fear knows how to use detail. Social comparison then completes the machine. Leon Festinger argued that people evaluate themselves partly by comparing themselves to others, especially when there is no clear objective standard. In many high-achievement environments, the standards are ambiguous. What does it mean to be good enough, smart enough, original enough, ready enough, worthy enough? So the eyes move sideways. They look at the person who speaks without notes, the person whose career seems smooth, the person who publishes more, the person who looks calm under pressure, the person online whose life appears edited by a merciful God. But comparison is usually unfair because we compare our insides to other people's surfaces. You know your own fear from the inside. You see their composure from across the room. You know the chaos behind your work. You see only the finished version of theirs. You hear your own uncertainty before every sentence. You hear only their final answer. So other people start to look real in a way you do not. They seem to possess something solid, some inner certificate, some secret permission to be where they are. You, meanwhile, feel assembled, a stack of habits, improvisations, good timing, over-preparation, and small acts of concealment. This is how a whole room can become haunted. Imagine a seminar table, a hospital ward, a studio, a graduate classroom, a board meeting, a lab, a backstage hallway. Everyone looks composed. Everyone is using the right language. Everyone is performing belonging. Inside, several people are quietly terrified. But because everyone performs calm, each person believes the fear is private. This is called pluralistic ignorance. A group can be full of people who privately doubt themselves, while each one believes they are the only one. The collective performance of confidence becomes evidence against every individual. Nobody says, "I am scared I do not belong here." So everyone concludes, "I am the only one scared." And the silence deepens. This is one of the loneliest parts of imposter syndrome. It isolates people inside a shared experience. It makes the common feel secret. It turns ordinary human uncertainty into a private defect. The mask does not only hide the fear, it creates more of it. Because every mask in the room becomes proof that everyone else has a face. The person suffering from imposter feelings may think they are surrounded by real people while they alone are acting. But many of the real people are acting too. This does not mean everyone is equally afraid. It does not mean all insecurity is imposter syndrome. It does not mean competence is irrelevant or that every doubt is secretly wisdom. Sometimes doubt is information. Sometimes you are not ready. Sometimes you need more training, more practice, more humility, more feedback, more time. But imposter syndrome does something different. It takes the normal evidence of being unfinished and interprets it as evidence of being fraudulent. It cannot distinguish between "I am still learning" and "I have deceived everyone." That confusion is devastating because every serious person is still learning. Every competent person has gaps. Every expert knows how much depends on conditions they cannot fully control. To be unfinished is not to be fake. It is to be alive. But the imposter mind wants a version of belonging that has no uncertainty in it. It wants entrance into a room where no part of the self trembles. It wants to feel chosen without the terror of being seen. That kind of belonging may not exist. Or if it exists, it may belong only to people who have stopped paying attention. There is an existential layer here that is rarely named. Imposter syndrome is not only the fear that you are not good enough, It is the fear that there is no solid self behind the performance, that beneath the title, the work, the reputation, the practiced phrases, and the skills you have gathered, there is no final core that can prove once and for all that you belong. You look inside for the certificate? There is only motion, effort, memory, fear, some habits that work, some people who helped you, some accidents that favored you, some nights you survived by doing the next thing. And because there is no shining object called true self-certainty, the imposter mind concludes that the self must be false. But maybe this is backwards. Maybe nobody has the certificate. Maybe belonging is not a feeling people carry before they enter the room. Maybe it is something built slowly by entering while still uncertain, again and again, until the nervous system learns that doubt is not a verdict. This is difficult to accept because we are surrounded by performances of arrival. People announce outcomes, not confusion. They post the publication, not the months of rejected drafts. They mention the promotion, not the fear that followed. They show the stage, not the bathroom mirror 5 minutes before. So, the world becomes a museum of finished selves, and you compare yourself to the exhibits. No wonder you feel counterfeit. You are comparing your unfinished interior to other people's curated evidence. But even in private, the problem continues. Because the imposter does not only fear other people, the imposter fears the inner witness, the part of you that saw how afraid you were, the part of you that remembers how much help you needed, the part of you that knows the final result was not born cleanly from genius, but dragged through confusion, pressure, luck, and compromise. This inner witness becomes dangerous because it knows the backstage. And the backstage rarely looks like legitimacy. A theater looks magical from the audience. From behind the curtain, there are ropes, dust, tape, sweat, missed cues, whispered panic, and someone holding a broken piece of scenery in place until the scene ends. The imposter thinks the backstage proves the magic was fake, but the backstage is how the magic is made. This distinction matters. Seeing the mess behind your competence does not mean you are a fraud. It means you are close enough to see production. The audience sees fluency. You remember the labor. The audience sees the clean answer. You remember the uncertainty before it. The audience sees the finished work. You remember the versions that failed. And because you remember the making, you distrust the result. This is a strange punishment. The person who knows the most about the work's creation may be the least able to believe in its value. Distance makes things look whole. Intimacy reveals the seams, and you are most intimate with your own mind. This is why even praise can become painful. Praise describes the object from the outside. Imposter fear remembers the object from the inside. The two descriptions do not feel compatible. They say, you are talented. You think, if only you saw how hard I had to try. They say, you are natural. You think, if only you knew how unnatural this feels. They say, you make it look easy. And this may be the worst one, because you know it was not easy. So the compliment feels like evidence that the performance worked too well. Now they do not see the effort. Now they have misunderstood you completely. This is how praise can become alienating. It names a version of you that does not match your private experience. And because the compliment feels wrong, you assume the achievement is wrong too. But maybe the mistake is in the myth of effortlessness. Maybe we have confused belonging with ease. Maybe we think the real ones are the people who do not struggle, when often the real ones are simply the people who have made a long relationship with struggle. A pianist does not become fake because the piece required practice. A surgeon does not become fake because the procedure still demands focus. A teacher does not become fake because they felt nervous before the first class. A leader does not become fake because they sometimes close the door and wonder if they are strong enough. The work being difficult does not prove you are unqualified. Sometimes it proves you are finally close to work that is real. But the imposter mind treats difficulty like exposure. It says, if I belonged, this would feel easier. It says, if I were truly good, I would not need so much effort. It says, if I were the real thing, I would not be afraid. That last sentence may be the deepest lie. Fear is not always evidence of absence. Sometimes fear is the body recognizing that something matters. The absence of fear can come from mastery, but it can also come from not understanding the stakes. Many confident people are not calm because they are wise. They are calm because they do not yet see what can break. This does not mean anxiety is proof of depth. Anxiety can distort. It can shrink the world. It can make ordinary tasks feel fatal. It should not be romanticized. But not all unease is pathology. Some unease is perception. Some doubt is the mind registering complexity. Some humility feels like fraudulence because the ego expected competence to feel like invincibility. There is a painful maturation in realizing that competence may never feel as clean as arrogance looked from far away. The people who seemed certain may not have been more capable. They may simply have been earlier in the story, or better at hiding, or less interested in the parts they did not know, or trained by life to speak in a way that made hesitation invisible. This is where the imposter paradox becomes darker. The more you grow, the more your standards grow with you. At first, you want to be good enough to enter. Then you enter and realize entry was not the end. Now you must contribute, then lead, then innovate, then be original, then be consistent, then become the kind of person others can depend on, then become the kind of person who makes it look graceful. Every door opens into another room, and each room has people who seem to have been there forever. So you start over, not completely, but emotionally. You become a beginner again at a higher level. This is why growth can feel like repeated exposure. You climb into new competence and immediately meet new inadequacy. The old confidence does not transfer cleanly. The previous proof feels expired. Yes, you did that. But this is different. Yes, they trusted you before, but now the stakes are higher. Yes, you survived the last room. But this room is full of people who will know. The mind keeps treating new levels as evidence that the old self was smuggled into a place it cannot survive. And because competent people often seek harder environments, they keep placing themselves where they feel less competent again. This is the hidden structure. The person grows. Then growth surrounds them with stronger peers, harder problems, subtler standards, and less obvious feedback. Then the person feels like a fraud. Not because they stopped improving, because improvement moved them closer to the frontier. At the frontier, nobody feels completely legitimate. The map is unfinished. The rules are unclear. The people around you are also improvising, though many have learned to make improvisation look like authority. Authority is often improvisation with a steady voice. That sentence may be uncomfortable, but it is everywhere. In hospitals, in classrooms, in companies, in studios, in families, in governments, in every room where someone must act before certainty arrives. Human life demands decisions under incomplete information, but the imposter wants certainty before permission. It wants to know beyond doubt that it has the right to speak, act, lead, create, belong, try. The world rarely gives that. The world gives partial evidence. Then a door, then silence, then the handle. This does not mean you should ignore doubt. Doubt can be a form of intelligence. It can keep you careful. It can make you prepare. It can protect others from your arrogance. The goal is not to kill doubt. A person with no doubt can become dangerous. The goal is to stop treating doubt as a confession. Doubt says, pay attention. The imposter says, you have been exposed. Those are not the same. One opens the eyes, the other closes the self. There is a moment before a difficult task where a competent person may feel a quiet fear. The fear says, this matters. You may not know enough. Look carefully. Prepare. Listen. Stay awake. That fear can serve the work, but then another voice attaches itself. This fear means you are not supposed to be here. That is the infection, not uncertainty itself. The interpretation of uncertainty as fraud. If there is any freedom, it may begin there, in the thin space between sensation and verdict. Between my body is afraid, and therefore I am fake. The body may be afraid because the task is difficult, because the room is new, because the stakes are high, because belonging has always been fragile for you, because long ago you learned that one mistake could change how people looked at you. The fear may have a history, but history is not always prophecy. You can carry old alarm bells into new rooms. They may ring even when there is no fire. This is another layer of the imposter experience. For many people, it is not only about competence, it is about belonging. The fear of being exposed often grows in places where a person has reason to feel watched, underestimated, tokenized, or historically unwelcome. A room can say you belong on paper and still make your nervous system doubt it. A name tag is not the same as safety. An invitation is not the same as ease. Some people are not only wondering whether they are good enough, they are wondering whether the room was built with people like them in mind. That matters, because when belonging is uncertain, every mistake becomes symbolic. A stumble is not just a stumble. It feels like confirmation of what the room may already suspect. In that context, imposter feelings are not merely private distortion. They can also be a response to real social pressure, real exclusion, real histories of being evaluated more harshly. So, we should be careful. Not every feeling of fraudulence comes from inside the individual. Sometimes the room helps create it. Sometimes the room benefits from calling it personal insecurity. But even then, the inner experience remains the same in one painful way. The person stands at the threshold and wonders if their presence is conditional. If I perform perfectly, I may stay. If I slip, they will know. This is not confidence training. This is existential labor. The labor of existing in a place while fearing that your existence there is provisional. It is exhausting. And it can make achievement feel less like arrival and more like surveillance. Every success says, continue, but never rest, because rest might reveal the fraud. So the imposter works harder, longer hours, more preparation, more checking. more emotional scanning, more rehearsing sentences before saying them, more reading the room for signs of disappointment. This overwork can produce real success, which creates another trap. The person succeeds because they over-prepared, then concludes the over-preparation was the only thing preventing exposure. So next time, they must do it again, more intensely, more secretly, with less sleep, with more fear. From the outside, the pattern looks like discipline. Inside, it is a hostage negotiation. The self says, I will let you be safe only if you never stop proving. And because the proving works often enough, the cycle becomes hard to break. Success does not disconfirm the fear. It becomes evidence that fear was necessary. This is why imposter syndrome can be so seductive to ambitious people. It hurts them, but it also seems to help them. It pushes them to prepare, to refine, to anticipate, to care. They may even be afraid of losing it. Who would I become without this fear? Would I become lazy? Would I become arrogant? Would I stop improving? Would I finally be exposed because I relaxed? The fear becomes a cruel manager. It gets results, so the person mistakes cruelty for standards. But a life cannot be built forever on threat. At some point, the body starts to understand success as danger. Recognition becomes danger. Opportunity becomes danger. Visibility becomes danger. The nervous system cannot tell the difference between being seen and being hunted. Then the person may begin to avoid the very things they once wanted. They do not apply, they do not publish, they do not speak, they do not ask for the role. They do not show the work until it is perfect, which means often they do not show it at all. The imposter voice promises protection, but it protects by shrinking the life. This is the quiet tragedy. A person may be competent enough to contribute, but too suspicious of themselves to appear. The room loses something, and the person calls it realism. I am just not ready. Maybe later, after one more credential, after one more year, after I finally feel legitimate. But legitimacy may not arrive as a feeling. It may arrive only as a pattern of action repeated under doubt. You do the work while unsure. You survive being seen. You learn that imperfection did not exile you. You collect evidence, not only of success, but of continuity. I made a mistake, and I remained. I asked a question, and the room did not collapse. I did not know, and then I learned. I was nervous and still useful. Maybe belonging is not the absence of trembling. Maybe belonging is discovering that trembling does not remove your name from the door. This is not inspirational in the usual sense. It is less comfortable than inspiration, because it does not promise that the fear will vanish. It suggests you may need to live more honestly beside it. The person at the door may still feel afraid. They may still suspect there has been an administrative error in the universe. They may still walk into the room feeling slightly transparent. But perhaps the difference is that they stop taking the feeling as final evidence. A feeling can be real without being correct. A fear can be sincere without being prophetic. A doubt can be intelligent without being a verdict. The imposter mind wants to turn every internal tremor into a courtroom sentence. Guilty, fake, exposed, unworthy. But maybe some tremors are just the sound of standing near something that matters. Maybe they are not proof that you should leave. Maybe they are proof that the room is large enough to awaken the part of you that still thinks belonging must be earned without flaw. There is no simple cure for this. Because the imposter feeling is not a simple mistake. It is made of ambition, memory, comparison, perfectionism, social pressure, and the terrifying openness of human ability. It is made of the fact that we are always partly becoming the people we pretend to already be. That last part is difficult, because in a sense, everyone is performing. The teacher performs teaching until the role becomes embodied. The leader performs steadiness while learning how to be steady. The artist performs courage before courage becomes familiar. The adult performs adulthood, often for years in rooms where no one admits how improvised everything feels. This does not mean everyone is fake. It may mean the self is not a hidden statue waiting to be revealed. Maybe the self is built through repeated acts. Maybe you become real not by waiting until you feel legitimate, but by doing the work with enough honesty that the performance slowly turns into character. The imposter thinks performance and authenticity are opposites, but human beings are stranger than that. Sometimes we act before we feel. Sometimes we commit before we believe. Sometimes we enter before we belong. Then, much later, the feeling catches up. Or maybe it never fully catches up. Maybe mature competence is not a state where doubt disappears. Maybe it is the ability to carry doubt without handing it the steering wheel. Maybe it is knowing the work is difficult and still beginning. Knowing you have gaps and still listening. Knowing you were helped and still accepting that help does not erase your effort. Knowing you were lucky and still refusing to reduce your whole life to accident. Knowing you are not the ideal self, not the ghost, not the flawless creature you once imagined competence would make you. Just a person, skilled in some ways, limited in others, still learning, still entering rooms, still occasionally standing with your hand on the handle, waiting for the old sentence to arrive. Maybe they made a mistake, and maybe, for once, you do not argue with it. Maybe you simply notice it. There you are. The old guard, the voice that thinks fear is wisdom, the voice that thinks shame is preparation, the voice that thinks belonging must feel certain before it can be real. You do not have to destroy it. It probably protected you once. But you do not have to obey it as if it were truth. Behind the door, the room continues. People speak, papers move, someone clears their throat. Someone else is also pretending to be less afraid than they are. Your name is still on the table, not because you are flawless, not because you have solved the problem of self-doubt, not because someone made an error that has not yet been found. Your name is there because, for now, you have work to do inside the room. And maybe that is all belonging ever gives anyone at first. Not certainty, not purity, not the final silence of doubt, just a place to stand and the next thing to do. So the question is not whether you can become so competent that you never feel like a fraud again. That may be the fantasy that keeps the fraud feeling alive. The question is whether you can stop demanding that competence feel like innocence, because competence is not innocence. Competence knows too much. It knows the risks, the flaws, the unfinished edges, the luck, the help, the possibility of being wrong. The fact that every real task contains more depth than the outsider can see. Maybe that is why it trembles. Not because it is fake, because it is awake. And perhaps the cruelest misunderstanding is that we expect belonging to feel like confidence, when often it feels like walking into the room anyway. The door opens. The room turns slightly toward you. For 1 second, the old fear speaks. Then you step forward, not because the fear has disappeared, but because maybe you do not feel like a fraud, because you do not belong in the room. Maybe you feel like a fraud because you finally understand the room is larger than anyone ever admits. Kich banjan huan tha. Sao gyai juanja chung. San sang cho 11 labs.